it's just wise for us to get started. I'd like to welcome you to the 2022 Leadership Conference at Jamaica THEOLOGICAL Seminary. It was initiated by a group in Florida that is named FRED. The group is chaired by Mr. Ted Weitzel, a longtime benefactor of JTS, and it is specifically designed to support the vision and mission of JTS. While the entire group is credited for the initiative here today, it was Mr. Robert Linton and his wife, Dr. Maureen Linton, who took the lead in mobilizing the other members of the group to make the event possible. We thank them for their interest in JTS and willingness to be sensitive to the leading of God, making this event possible to us today. As you may have known, the main event was to have been a 2-day workshop on Wednesday and Thursday with Dr. Jimmy Knott. However, unfortunately, he and his wife, Linda, are unable to travel, and we were forced to cancel the workshop with him. But we are left with 5 experienced professionals who will make presentations on various topics related to the theme, Effective Leadership for the 21st Century. These 5 presenters include Mr. Courtney Campbell, Dr. Margaret Barnett, Dr. Michael Friday, Reverend Clinton Chisholm, and Dr. Patricia Holness. They will address such topics as achieving transformational results through inclusion and visionary leadership, partnership dynamics in transformational leadership, the dark side of leadership, people engagement in authentic leadership, a call to true leadership and the fundamentals of Christian leadership, and leadership fostering barrier-free enthusiasm. The composite of the insights to be gleaned from the presentations should be able to stimulate thought and inspire commitment to the implementation of effective leadership for the 21st century. I am sure that the treatment of these topics will generate questions, and I would ask those who are joining us online to raise your hands should you have a question for the presenters, and we will endeavor to provide an opportunity for answers to be given. Today's presenter is Mr. Courtney Campbell, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Victoria Mutual Group, a leading financial organization in Jamaica with operations that extend the major financial districts of North America and the United Kingdom. Mr. Campbell assumed his position in April of 2016 when he immediately went about igniting a transformation of the organization. And as part of that transformation, he initiated an ambitious digital strategy that has led to new products and services being delivered in modern, convenient ways. Mr. Campbell has leveraged the organization's cultural beliefs and core values to inspire the VM team's passion for uplifting Jamaicans. In November 2021, the VM group underwent a brand transformation, signifying publicly the reinvigorated spirit and focus of the group. Leading the group, Mr. Campbell has distinguished himself as a strident advocate for greater financial inclusion, which is the founding purpose of VM and a significant motivator behind the work that he does. Before joining VM, Mr. Campbell had already established an enviable record of success in several senior executive roles, including that of CEO of Grace Kennedy Financial Group. Over 23 years with the National Commercial Bank, serving in various management positions that included head of the retail banking division and other roles instrumental in the bank's success. Academic and professional credentials that Mr. Campbell brings to his role include a BSc degree in Management Studies from the University of the West Indies and an MBA in Finance with distinction, jointly awarded by the University of Wales and Manchester Business School. He is also a member of the Chartered Institute of Bankers, London. Mr. Campbell's civic engagement include Director of the VM Building Society and all its subsidiaries, as well as Associate Company, British Caribbean Insurance Company, Chairman of the VM Foundation, Corporate Champion for the UWI STAT, Student Today, Alumni Tomorrow, Mona Campus, and he serves on the Governor General's Jamaica Trust. He is an advisory board member of the Governor General's Program for Excellence and I Believe Initiative Ambassador. He serves on the Investment Committee of the Council of World Missions. He's a former chairman of the National Education Trust and the United Church Mission Enterprise. He is a Justice of the Peace. Mr. Campbell is married to Pauline, and they have 2 sons. And I don't think we could have found a better person to engage us today than Mr. Courtney Campbell, providing insights in this leadership conference. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Courtney Campbell to the podium to present on the topic, Achieving Transformational Results Through Inclusion and Visionary Leadership.
Thank you very much, Dr. Thompson, and wish to congratulate Dr. Thompson and Dr. Barnett and the leadership here for, and I'm the Chairman, Leroy Marshall, welcome, for putting on this leadership seminar, and I think you have a really interesting week ahead of you. I'm really happy to be here with you, and as I said, congratulations for organizing this event, because it's important that we, all of us, interrogate the components of effective leadership for the 21st century. Because despite our varied backgrounds, traditions, and interests, we can all agree that there is tremendous value in sound leadership, in the pursuit of shared goals. Families, communities, organizations, and nations are positively transformed or destroyed due to the quality of leadership. And it is commendable that the Jamaica Theological Seminary recognizes the significance and continues to be a champion of sound leadership. I know that for many people, we're just about at lunchtime, so my hope is that you will find some good food for thought as together we consider the topic, Achieving Transformational Results Through Inclusion and Visionary Leadership. My presentation will be in 4 segments. Firstly, I will make a case for transformation. Secondly, I will suggest 2 transformation imperatives. Thirdly, I will share 3 stories of visionary and inclusive leadership, some that I'm very close to. And then finally, I will share some tips on leading change. This conference is timely because it is happening during a period of great stress for Jamaica and the wider Caribbean, and in fact there is stress all over the world. So we need a transformation that can only come about through inclusive and visionary leadership. This year we celebrate 60 years of political independence. And we have been entertaining ourselves. We had an entertaining drone show at the Grand Gala. And we continue to be inspired by the achievements of our athletes and our musicians. However, if we are to be true to ourselves, we have to admit that we have underperformed in many critical areas. The high rate of homicides has us in the top 10 worldwide. Our economy has been stagnant for most of the 60 years. Our education system is not addressing the needs of the majority of our children, and many of our critical state institutions are not fulfilling their respective mandates. We have a bold 2030 vision, but the PIOJ just informed us that only 17% of the targets are being met. So if we're going to transform Jamaica and achieve our 2030 vision, we have to transform the practice of leadership in all spheres in Jamaica. The new watchwords I'm proposing must be inclusion and vision, which incorporates innovation. Now, many years ago, I read the book, Why Nations Fail. Don't know if any of you have read that book. Why Nations Fail by MIT economist Darren Acemoglu and the University of Chicago economist James Robinson. And based on decades of economic research, they argued that the main driver of whether nations prosper or remain poor is not natural resources, geography, ethnicity, but whether the political and economic arrangements were inclusive or extractive, meaning that they're serving exclusive, narrow interests. Inclusive institutions or inclusive countries have representative legislators, good public schools because they emphasize educating their entire populations. They have open markets that encourage competition. They have strong patent systems that encourage innovation. They invest in infrastructure and fight poverty and disease because they are about including everyone in the path forward. In the countries with extractive institutions, Acemoglu and John and Robinson point out that small groups of elites use state power for their own ends and ensure that the economic systems protect their narrow interests. And I recently read some other data. A study that looked at GDP per capita growth from 1961 to 2017, so it's fairly up to date, for 84 developing countries. And the study clearly shows that the Asian tigers, Thailand and Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, and the dragons, South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Singapore, are rapidly converging towards a standard of advanced nations. So they are catching up with the advanced nations. While the least advanced African countries, such as Central African Republic, Congo, Niger, Gambia, and Caribbean nations, and it really broke my heart to see us in that category, Haiti, Jamaica, and some Latin American countries such as Venezuela, it is clear from the statistics that we have stagnated or experienced sluggish growth over that period, 1961 to 2017. So the question for us is why? What has caused the difference in the growth rates? And many factors are responsible, but today I will highlight just 3 levers of frontier innovation that have contributed to the countries that have done well really growing fast, and those that have been lagging, we haven't paid sufficient attention to these 3 factors. The first one, and perhaps most important, is the whole matter of education, the knowledge economy. Education and the diffusion of knowledge and information have been at the foundation of all successful national transformations. And here's some history of the grand takeoff in global economic growth and social well-being. Now we have to go way back. We're going back now to the 18th century, which is the 1700s, right? Especially with respect to housing, nutrition, public health. Those standards are where things were then are actually unrecognizable to us today. In developed countries, the richest countries in the world, deaths from famine and hypothermia have almost entirely disappeared, whereas they were rampant until the end of the 19th century. In the 17th century, 25 to 30% of newborns died before the age of 1. All 25 to 30% of babies would die before they got to 1 year old. 50% of people died before they got to age 20. Today, infant mortality in the European Union is 4 per 1,000. So the question then is, why were GDP, global GDP and population growth stagnant prior to 1820? Why did a sustained growth takeoff occur only in 1820, even though Europe had been the scene of important discoveries since the Middle Ages? Why? One explanation is that the diffusion of knowledge and information played a critical role in the 18th century, thanks to the emergence of affordable postal service and the cost of printing. That's what inclusion is about. The number of newspapers exploded and numerous encyclopedias appeared, so the number of letters transmitted by the U.S. Postal Service increased from 2 million in 1800 to 8.9 million just 20 years later in 1820. And similarly, the number of newspapers distributed increased from 1.9 million in 1800 to 6 million in 1820. Why am I going back so far? Really to make the point that the diffusion of information produced by specialists in the various disciplines made technical and scientific knowledge accessible and greatly facilitated the process of knowledge accumulation. And that situation contrasts sharply with that of the 15th century, when knowledge was jealously guarded by guilds and trade organizations. So if we hold the information to ourselves, we won't grow. If we include others in the information sharing, we will grow. In the 18th and 19th century, a true culture of sharing information arose. Inclusion works. So inventors did not begin from scratch for each invention. They inherited the wealth of all the preceding inventions and were able to stand on the shoulders of giants. Today, we are now in 2022. We're no longer in 1820. Today, the key driver of what is called frontier innovation is basic research and postgraduate education. We have to invest in our human capital as our #1 priority. There is no Silicon Valley without Stanford University. The closer a country is to the technological frontier, the greater the impact of investment in postgraduate education on productivity growth in that country. Less advanced countries like ours should give priority to investment now in primary and secondary education. So that's one driver, the knowledge economy, education. The second driver of the takeoff was competition. Competition that enabled innovation and creative destruction to take place, notwithstanding the resistance or opposition of vested interests in the different nations. In a politically fragmented Europe, nations competed for the most brilliant minds. 17th century China was the complete opposite, because, I read about this, it's so interesting. The absence of competitive pressures enabled incumbent economic powers to have the last word, as the only innovations that were allowed to emerge in China were those handpicked by the emperor. And there were few opportunities for emigration of Chinese innovators whose inventions had not been selected. So as a result of this exclusive system, closely held, closely controlled, the Chinese economy stagnated throughout the 19th century and into the early 20th century, while other economies were industrializing. Inclusion works. Exclusion doesn't work. Empirical data in the 1990s show a positive correlation between the intensity of competition in a sector and the rate of productivity growth in that sector. More competition seems to be associated with more intense innovation and higher productivity growth. And this is confirmation of the power of both inclusion and vision. The vision to innovate and to satisfy unmet needs. Greater competition, inclusion, induces firms to innovate in order to escape competition. The wealthier a country is the more frontier firms it has. Competition is a stronger growth lever in more advanced countries. Among the most advanced countries, those with high entry barriers have substantially lower growth than advanced countries with lower entry barriers. The more inclusion, the more competition, the better it is for all of us. Governance also impacts inclusion, innovation, and growth. The more corruption there is in a country, the greater the ability of incumbent firms to pressure politicians to reduce competition and to prevent the entry of new firms. And that impacts growth. And then the third lever is that of the sector that I work in, organization of the financial system. The more advanced a country is, the more its growth relies on frontier innovation, the more stock markets, private equity, and venture capital stimulate growth in that country. In less advanced countries that prioritize imitation instead of innovation, growth depends now more on bank financing. Again, the more inclusive, responsive, and innovative the financial system is, the better the country's growth prospects. So what then should our response be? I want to suggest two transformation imperatives. We in Jamaica, the Caribbean widely, but certainly in Jamaica, we need a transformation in education. Let us develop a vision for a more inclusive and equitable education system. Nelson Mandela said it, that education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. Before COVID-19, Jamaica's economy suffered from low rates of productivity and high income inequality. According to the Jamaica Productivity Center, Jamaica has the lowest labor productivity when compared to other Caribbean countries such as Barbados and the Dominican Republic, St. Lucia, and Trinidad and Tobago. Over the last 2 decades, Jamaica has had weak and declining levels of productivity. So from 2001 to 2019, that's what, 18 years, labor productivity, capital productivity, and total factor productivity recorded average annual declines of 0.6%, 0.2%, and 0.4% respectively. One reason for the low productivity is the low availability of some of the skills required to be globally competitive in this era. So we have to transform the content of our training. COVID-19 has accelerated technology adoption in all sectors. So these talent-related challenges have actually become even more pronounced. If your company or your country cannot claim a ready pool of these digital skills, you will be left behind. The income inequality has been exacerbated by the permanent and sometimes temporary losses of employment and income. To address these issues, we will have to help our people identify and transition to new labor market opportunities supported by revised labor market policies. So we must also invest in reskilling and upskilling programs. So in 2018, in the VM group, we devised an ambitious digital transformation program. And the main goal of this program is to move from doing digital to being digital. And we wanted to infuse digital technologies into all of VM's key business processes. However, to be able to do this well, we have had to ensure that our people develop critical digital skills that allow them to thrive not only in a digital workspace, but in the new digital world. As such, an entire pillar of our digital strategy is dedicated to digital capabilities building, with a focus on skills such as design thinking, customer journey mapping, data analysis, agile methodologies, Scrum, Lean, Black Belt, DevOps, all of these things we're teaching our people. So our people have adopted now and to remote collaboration. We have invested in a digital collaboration platform to enable the shift to this new paradigm. And even more importantly, we have a continuous training program designed to help our team capitalize on the benefits of the platform for greater productivity while working remotely. It cannot be overemphasized how important it is for educational institutions such as JTS to recognize the importance of focus on these new types of digital skills. They are now skills for survival. They are no longer optional. Our labor market requires this upskilling, and it is imperative that we advance and embed these new skills in our nation's educational systems. For the post-COVID world, business leaders and legislators will need to consider new labor market practices, regulations, and laws to support the new normal. According to McKinsey, many organizations across the world adopted flexible work arrangements, automation, and redesigned work processes to reduce cost and to mitigate the uncertainties caused by COVID-19. Business leaders have also stated that they will not return to the old way of work, but will invest even more in automation and artificial intelligence to change the way that work is performed in the future. But there's another long-standing challenge in our education system that demands transformation. It's not only about the skills that we're teaching. Based on outcomes, only 25% of our just over 160 high schools are performing at the level required to properly prepare our young people for a prosperous future. In the other 75% of schools, only 2 of every 10 students pass at least 5 C6 subjects, including English and mathematics. So as a result, only 19% of Jamaicans aged 19 to 24 are currently enrolled in tertiary education. We have to transform the quality of our educational outcomes in the majority of our schools. We are leaving behind too many of our talented young Jamaicans. These are the potential data scientists, actuaries, engineers, bankers of the future. We are leaving them behind not because they are not talented, not because they don't have the potential, but because of major and multifaceted weaknesses in our early childhood, primary, and secondary systems. So we have to ask ourselves the question, what are the investments required to transform this situation? How can we strategize to achieve an audacious goal that in, say, 15 years, at least 90% of our 18-year-olds either matriculate for tertiary education or obtain vocational certification? We can be intentional and strategize around that. So we need a transformation of education. But I'm proposing that we also need a transformation of our culture. We need a transformation of our culture. Our national pledge says, can we say it together? I pledge the love and loyalty of my heart, the wisdom and courage of my mind, the strength and vigor of my body in the service of my fellow citizens. I promise to stand up for justice, brotherhood, and peace, to work diligently and creatively, to think generously and honestly. So let me stop there. It is true that many Jamaicans are hardworking, and many Jamaicans promote justice and brotherhood and peace. But we have to admit that ours is a low discipline and low trust society. In too many areas of national life, we are not experiencing the generosity and the honesty of which we speak when we recite our national pledge. Harvard University's sociology professor, Jamaican Orlando Patterson, in his book, The Confounding Island, points out that not enough has been done to address the social cultural factors impacting our high crime rate over the years. How can we effectively address the low regard for rules, the indiscipline, the blight culture, Patterson asks. We must reject warped values that would see people who promote violence and hate in their music become the heroes of our young people. So can a national culture be transformed? What types of interventions have worked in other countries? On an organizational level, VM has been successfully pursuing a culture transformation program. This program is based on our realization that you either manage your culture or it will manage you. Culture can make the difference between success and failure. Culture produces results. Your organization's culture determines your results, and the results you want should largely determine the kind of culture you need. We are managing the organizational culture so that all leaders and team members think and act in a manner necessary to achieve the desired results reflected in our bold vision. We know as leaders of VM that we have the responsibility of shifting the culture. That's a leader's responsibility. In many important ways, VM is being successfully transformed, and a big driver of that transformation is the transformation of our culture into one that is characterized by greater ambition, greater urgency, greater collaboration, and ownership. And one might say that you may be able to transform the culture of a 144-year-old institution because you only have 900 team members there, but it is impossible to transform a national culture. Well, I will say it may be more difficult, it may take much longer, but it is not impossible. As Mandela says, it always seems impossible until it's done. Across many nations and ethnicities, it has been proven that culture impacts socio-economic outcomes. So culture also produces results on a national scale. Can we then agree the type of society that we would like to live in? Those are the results. And agree the values that Jamaicans would need to display. How would we influence and incentivize people to think and act in order for us to achieve those results? Should aspects of this desired culture be reflected in the curricula of our education system? Should we be teaching character education and placing greater emphasis on life skills? How can we train our boys to respect women? How do we teach our people to value human life? Parenting is a privilege, but it is a difficult job. So could we teach our young people some foundational parenting skills so that all Jamaicans, say at 18 years old, would be aligned around a few parenting must-dos as they enter adulthood? This way, even if they don't ever become parents themselves, they can be great uncles and aunts and godparents? How could academia and the business community and policymakers forge a unique partnership to research and shape national culture transformation, perhaps starting with some communities? A key aspect of transforming our culture is the transformation of governance, because Jamaica is a low-trust society. And if we are going to transform our communities, we need to close the wide trust deficit that is all-pervasive. If we're going to realize the bold vision that we have for this country to be a place of choice, to live, work, raise families, and do business, we will need to strengthen many of our key institutions. Transparency International publishes an annual corruption perception index. Based on their ranking, a score of 0 means a country is perceived to be very corrupt, while 100 means a country is perceived to be very clean. And they assess 180 countries. The 2020 results show that Jamaica had a score then of 44, so we're below 50. And we're ranked 69 of the 180 countries in the world. And we're perceived to be the 5th most corrupt state in the Caribbean, behind Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago, Domrep, and Haiti. We have some work to do. Persistent transparency gaps affect citizens' trust in institutions. And it is important that citizens must trust the institutions of government. We need to overhaul the running of many government agencies to ensure that they practice the best governance principles and deliver service that is just and equitable for all citizens. All communities should have their garbage collected on schedule. All communities should feel that the planning and environmental authorities are acting with transparency. There needs to be greater accountability in how public bodies report to the people on their stewardship. So in September 2022, in Jamaica, we need some new thinking and new actions in how we approach leadership in our beloved country. Everything rises and falls on leadership. We need leaders, institutions, and governance practices in all sectors that inspire rather than undermine trust. Jamaica's transformation will depend on a much more inclusive, equitable education system and a vision of a new culture of discipline, respect, generosity, and honesty. Yes, friends, there's much to be done. And this is why, as I emphasized earlier, visionary and inclusive leadership is so critical. Former US First Lady Michelle Obama said something that I just love. She said, "People who are strong lift others up. People who are truly powerful bring others together." People who are truly strong lift others up. People who are truly powerful bring others together. As Christians, we believe in leadership with purpose. If we think about it, Jesus has been the greatest change leader ever. He's still changing billions of lives after having left Earth thousands of years ago. And he did it without writing any books or starting any university. So what did Jesus say about leading change? First and foremost, he was clear about the nature and direction of the change that he was mandated to lead. If you want to read about that mandate, Luke 4 verses 18 and 19. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor, to bring sight to the blind, to bring liberty to the captives, right? That's the mandate. He was clear about his mandate, and he lived the mandate. He was inclusive, and he was visionary. So I wish to share some familiar stories of transformation via visionary and inclusive leadership that would bring it home. Because we're talking high level so far, nation and so on, you know, educational system. But I want to bring it home to some examples that I'm very familiar with. I want to start with a baby born on March 15, 1915, in Glasgow, Scotland. And this baby boy missed lots of school in his teens due to rheumatic fever. But he developed the joy of reading. And when he entered university to study philosophy and psychology. Louis Davidson joined the student Christian movement, and he developed a passionate commitment to his purpose, as he put it when offered an attractive opportunity for an academic career. He chose an appointment to the Scottish Students Christian Movement staff for 2 years. That's similar to our ISCF. He accepted that, and he said, I was meant to take more positive action in the world. That's why he took up that job. At the age of 24, he came to Jamaica to be the headmaster of Woolmer's Boys' School, as the youngest headmaster of Woolmer's at the time. And he was extremely disappointed when his service contract of 3 years was not renewed 3 years later. So 2 years later, in 1944, 2 years after his contract with Woolmer's ended, 1944 now, the year of universal adult suffrage in Jamaica, and 6 years after the 1838 labor riots, Professor T.S. Taime wrote these words in a publication called Welfare and Planning in the West Indies. And I'm going to quote. He said that the churches must be persuaded to look upon themselves as the leaders of a new movement towards social reconstruction, unquote. So in response to that study, Louis Davidson's church, the Presbyterian Church of Jamaica at the time, mandated Louis to find ways of making the church more effective in social welfare and lead this new movement towards social reconstruction. He conducted an island-wide tour interviewing ministers and laymen, inclusion, reaching out to everyone. In the 1945 Synod of the Presbyterian Church, Louis, then an elder of the relatively young Webster Memorial United Church, or Presbyterian Church at the time, presented a report that recommended the establishment of a Christian education center in a rural area. What's that? Vision. The majority of Synod delegates passionately supported this plan. They made a leap of faith and decided to build. Knox College opened its doors in 1947. In fact, I just looked at a newspaper, the Gleaner, and I'll show you when I'm finished. The Gleaner had an article on September the 5th, 1947, about the opening of Knox College. A work led by two elders of Webster Memorial, Louis Davidson and David Bent. So we celebrate 75 years of excellence and holistic student development this year, 2022. This school started in that way, ranked number 4 based on academic results in Jamaica over the last few years. The second example is the VM group. The Morant Bay Rebellion was a small settlers uprising. By 1865, small settlers' hopes and aspirations were transformed into frustration and disillusionment. The promise of emancipation had been deferred. The oligarchy had deliberately disenfranchised them with respect to eligibility to vote, discriminated against them in the courts, burdened them with a high proportion of taxation, limited their access to education, failed to implement basic public health measures even after disastrous outbreaks of cholera and yellow fever, and ignored their protests and objections to these injustices and neglect. Missionaries, including many Baptists, had tried hard to work within the system and they had failed. Literate petition writing small settlers of St. Thomas, led by native Baptists, took to the streets and exploded in riot in Morant Bay in October 1865. And Governor Eyre, as we know, responded with draconian measures and brutality, which was far in excess of the violence of the riot. And so these included the execution of the Paul Bogle and George William Gordon, Samuel Clark, and several elementary school teachers, and many members of the native Baptists whose houses and churches were destroyed. The oligarchy panicked as they feared another Haiti was at hand. The assembly dissolved itself and invited a crown colony government in 1866. And the governor, John Peter Grant, literally adopted the small settlers, the working class grievances as his reform agenda for the colony. These included the reform of the judiciary, the abolition of the militia, the setting up of the Jamaica Constabulary Force, that's how our police force was established, the establishment of a public health system, the expansion of teachers' colleges, an elementary school system, and the disestablishment of the Anglican Church in 1870. That's the separation of the Anglican Church from the state. And Reverend William J. Gardner, who was then minister of the North Street Congregational Church, and a few friends founded the first building society. It was called the Kingston Benefit Building Society in 1864 to promote the well-being of the working and middle classes. Again, vision and inclusion. The stated goal of all building societies established from 1872 onwards was to assist the working and middle classes, or the middle and working classes, or the working classes in house purchase and home improvement. They were the classes that earned income but not enough to purchase property without accumulating savings. So in today's terminologies, between 1864 to 1871, Gardner and his anxious friends provided proof of concept of building societies as a viable, feasible, and workable means of house purchase and home improvement for people who otherwise could not do so. After 1871, the building society concept spread rapidly. Reverend Henry Clark was the earliest adopter in leading the effort to found the Westmoreland Building Society in 1872, followed by Reverend Cork in 1874 with the founding of the St. James Benefit Building Society. And now in 1878, Reverend Douglas Downer, the rector of Kingston Parish Church, founded the Victoria Mutual Building Society. So by 1900, almost every parish had a building society. For example, the St. Anne Benefit and St. Elizabeth Benefit and Manchester Mutual Building Society, Trelawney, St. Mary, etc. It is important to note some important facts and common features of the early building societies. Firstly, the idea of building societies originated in the church, started by a missionary of the Congregational Church, one of the antecedent denominations of the United Church in Jamaica and the Cayman Islands. But it was spread quickly by Anglican clergy, but also included other groups. You get the picture? Inclusion. In other words, the early building societies had strong connections with the church and gave every appearance that they were firmly grounded on an ethical base. But as I said, they were inclusive. Today, one of those entities, VM, is the third largest deposit-taking institution in Jamaica. That's JN, sorry. VM is the fifth largest and the fourth largest in loans, serving over 340,000 active members and clients, with 16 branches in Jamaica, 5 overseas offices, 8 subsidiaries, and 2 associate companies. We have recommitted ourselves to the noble purpose of empowering people to achieve financial well-being through financial education, home ownership, innovative investment and pension solutions, remittances across multiple channels and markets. Again, vision and inclusion. And then the third story we all know well. I've spoken about Knox College. I've spoken about VM. I want to tell you, take you back to the Old Testament. The story on the rebuilding of the walls of Jerusalem. The book of Nehemiah is one of my favorite Old Testament stories. It is part of the story of the Jews who returned to Judah after their exile in Babylon. Zerubbabel had led the first group of exiles about 90 years earlier in rebuilding the temple. Then 80 years later, Ezra led them in restoring their worship. And now, 14 years after Ezra's journey, Nehemiah set out to rebuild Jerusalem's walls. And the city wall had lain in ruins for more than 120 years, is what the scriptures tell us. Nehemiah, who was a cupbearer, received a visit from his brother and some other men who came from Judah. And they told Nehemiah that the Jews were in great trouble and disgrace, and that the wall of Jerusalem was broken down. The news upset Nehemiah greatly. He mourned and he fasted and prayed. Now, it is important to note that Nehemiah lived in comfort in the palace of the king of Persia. He could have said that Jerusalem and the Jews living there were of no concern of his, but he was compassionate, concerned about making lives flourish, and he turned to God in prayer. He then led the Jews in the mission of rebuilding the wall, and they completed this process in 52 days. It had lain in ruin for 120 years. It was rebuilt in 52 days. This is a powerful leadership story about vision. Leaders who navigate do even more than control the direction in which they and their people travel. They see the whole trip in their minds before they leave the dock. They have a vision for their destination. They understand what it will take to get there. They know who they will need on the team to be successful, and they recognize the obstacles long before they appear on the horizon. Effective navigating leaders, leaders with vision, balance optimism and idealism, intuition and planning, faith and fact. They understand the value in the contribution of others, and they rally for inclusive outcomes. They are well prepared because the preparation conveys confidence and trust to the people. Because John Maxwell said it is not the size of the project that determines its acceptance, support, and success. It's the size of the leader. Leaders who are good navigators are capable of taking their people just about anywhere. So, effective navigating leaders, visionary leaders, see farther than others see. Nehemiah was able to see the problem even though he lived hundreds of miles away from Jerusalem, and he could picture the solution in his head. They see more than others see. He knew that the wall could and should be rebuilt, and he knew what it would take to do it. He knew where to get resources, and they also see before others see. He knew that he saw the danger posed by the opponents, and he refused to yield to enemy plots. He formulated strategies to defend the city and to keep the people working at the same time. The Jews needed only 54 days to rebuild a city wall that had lain in ruins for more than 120 years. Leadership made the difference. Nehemiah knew his purpose, made his plans, and he led the people through the process. And so I want to share as I close an 8-stage change process based on John Cotter's book, Leading Change, that can help us as we go about leading transformational change with inclusion and vision. Firstly, step 1, to establish a sense of urgency. Examine the realities that you are faced with. The walls lay in ruin. Identify and discuss crises or potential crises or major opportunities. What are you faced with now? What are the realities of your situation? For the Knox College story, the need for the church to play a role in social reconstruction. For the VM story, the need to bring hope and well-being to the working classes and the middle classes. In Jamaica of 2022, there are numerous situations that demand urgent attention. The Ministry of Education says that 120,000 students had not been engaged in online classes during the pandemic. This is massive learning loss. Beyond this, we have to urgently prepare our young people for the new jobs that are emerging in this rapidly changing global digital economy. And we have the crime situation and drug dealing and so on. Those are some of the realities. So that's one, establishing a sense of urgency. Then secondly, creating a guiding coalition, putting together a group with enough power to lead the change. That's what Nehemiah did, getting a group to work together like a team. For the Knox project, the Presbyterian Church established a committee to raise funds in Jamaica, led by Reverend John Beatty, who was then the minister of Webster Memorial Church at the time. Louis Davidson and David Ben formed a great partnership. For the Early Building Society movement, Reverend Gardner, by his own account, worked with several friends. For the VM project, Reverend Downer worked closely with other clergymen from other denominations. And then step 3, developing a vision and strategy. Create a vision to help direct the change effort. Develop strategies for achieving that vision. That's what Nehemiah did. He engaged other leaders and distributed the work among them. He enlisted the cooperation of everyone, including the priests. He assigned people to work near their houses, so they had a good incentive to perform well. In chapter 4, we see where he ensured that the people were mindful of the risks of attack, and he remained watchful. And he asked them, or challenged them to remain knoxful. Reverend Davidson of Knox did extensive travel and research in Jamaica, Scotland, England, and the US. He engaged lots of overseas partners in his efforts to develop relevant and innovative programs for the new educational center. And vision and strategy, that has been the story of VM. Moving from the start in 1878, doing savings and mortgages, only to now be offering the full range of financial services, including the overseas offices, the latest digital channels, all delivered by expert and caring people. We are now executing on our 4 strategic goals as we pursue our 2023 results. Strong integrated group, modern mutual, employer of choice, and empowered members. So that's step 3. Step 4, communicate the change vision. Use every vehicle possible to constantly communicate the new vision and strategies. Nehemiah communicated. He prayed to God. He then worked up the courage to speak with his boss, the king of Persia. He mobilized and challenged the Jews to work with him to rebuild the wall. He communicated with the various builders of the wall, making clear the sections for which they were responsible. He made sure to name all these leaders in the book, giving credit for the work accomplished. He was inclusive in his communication. And having the guiding coalition role model the behavior expected of the employees. So it's important that not only you, but all the leaders you engage role model the behavior. Communication is a key part of any change program. In VM, this is done at several levels. At my level, I communicate with the wider team through the annual business conference, through regular digital town halls, through my listening tour, meetings with all branches. Every year I go to every branch, every subsidiary, every support unit to speak with them in small groups. Every year I do that. So they look forward to the annual visits. And plus, I block time every 2 weeks for meetings with individual team members, for one-on-one sessions, for feedback, for advice, and for mentoring. But this process is broad-based because the other executives and other managers share business updates at various online fora and through our weekly VM Insider video series. Step 5. Step 4 was communicating. Step 5 is empowering broad-based action. Get rid of obstacles. Nehemiah got resources for the construction of the wall. He mobilized the leaders and the people. He prepared the people to cope with opposition and other risks. Sometimes you have to change systems and structures that undermine the change vision. Sometimes you have to encourage risk-taking and non-traditional ideas and activities and actions. And we must communicate a sensible vision to our people. It is important that they share in the sense of purpose. Number 6, generate short-term wins. Plan for visible improvements in performance or wins. Create those wins. Visibly recognize and reward people who made the wins possible. You know, we know from the minutes of VM the earlier savings accounts and who got the first mortgage, right? You know, all of these things must be celebrated. Knox's officially opening on September 3rd, 1947 was a special occasion. Step 7, consolidating gains and producing more change. Using increased credibility to change all systems, structures, and policies that don't fit together and don't fit the transformation vision. Hiring, promoting, and developing people who can implement the change vision. You know, and then finally, step 8, anchoring the new approaches in the culture. Create better performance through customer and productivity-oriented behavior, more and better leadership, and more effective management. Articulate the connections between the new behaviors and organizational success. You know, it's important that we anchor the new approaches in the culture. I visited Knox College 75 years later recently. And when I visited recently for some groundbreaking of the 6th Farm block, I was struck by the amazing discipline of the students. Hundreds of teenagers stood in the sun awaiting the arrival of the new Chief of Defense Staff, Admiral Antoinette Wims Gorman. But you could have heard a pin drop. These are teenagers waiting for long periods in the sun. You could have heard a pin drop. because it's a highly positive culture based on interventions by the school's administrators over the years. Just that example. So, friends, this time of volatility, uncertainty, and complexity reflects a depth and a pace of change that is unprecedented in the history of human beings. It is a special time for the world. The world needs visionary and inclusive leadership. Please ensure that these two traits characterize the leadership that you offer. Thanks again for allowing me to spend some time with you today. I wish you all the very best.
Mr. Campbell, I'd like you to remain for a time of a few questions. As we anticipated, you would have stimulated our minds, our thinking, and I am very sure that there are questions waiting for you to answer. In fact, as I listened to you, I saw where there could have been, or there is, a need for us to join or infuse the humanities with the sciences. Right. You made reference to the digital approaches to doing creative things and innovative things today, but the humanities are beckoning and they're on the sidelines, and I think we do have some opportunities there. What can you say to us about merging, infusing, integrating the humanities with the sciences to create this transformational change you make reference to?
Great question. So I do believe that the humanities will continue to be important, because it's important that in business we understand how people think and behave, right? And there are people who study, those patterns. Now, what's important, so the humanities will continue to have their place. But what's important for us to recognize is that the people who are helping us to navigate those changes be equipped with the digital tools, right, to perform. So they need to be able to analyze data, for example, or to work with team members who are in a position to do that. And very importantly, they need to be able to collaborate with others using the digital tools, others who may not even be based here in Jamaica. It is very, right now, we have lots of people participating on teams that are on 5 different continents, working on the same team, on the same project. And so the digital platforms and the digital collaboration tools facilitate that type of team work. And it's important that our people who are trained in psychology or whatever, whatever they bring to their philosophy, whatever they're bringing to the table, are able to work together with others in other markets.
Very good response. Any questions from the audience at this time? No? One more question. Yes, go ahead, Mr. Marshall.
Let me add my expression of gratitude to you for the very transforming suggestions that you have made to leaders. You indicated that VM is transforming itself, but it is doing so at 120 years old?
40.
140 years old.
That's right.
All right, so over the century and a half, it would have accumulated its own ethos and culture. And sometimes cultures that are so long-lived are very hard to change.
Yes.
And some in the management literature, sometimes some have suggested that you have to break legs, and you have to learn to figure out how to deal with the pain. How has VM's experience been, perhaps leaders before you and certainly your leadership now in this time of transformation, in causing pain in order to move this transformation, or managing the pain, if you did cause any pain, as a price to be paid for successful transformation and cultural change?
Great question. Thanks for that. So I think, as you said, it's a difficult thing to do. But many years ago, even before I got there, we started on a road adopting what is called the culture of accountability, and facilitated by some external partners. And it's a simple, some things are simple but not easy to do, right? Fairly simple concept. We understand that current set of results are based on certain behaviors that are based on certain thinking, right? And certain beliefs, certain experiences. That's a culture that then drives the results. And it's important to get everyone to agree together on the results that we would like to have, the different set of results. So one set of behaviors, one culture leads to a particular set of results, but we wish to have a different set of results. And so what we need to do now is work together to agree the new culture, the new behaviors that would deliver the B results, right? The new set of results. And so we have a process of hearing from everyone, getting agreement from everyone on this new culture, the new behavior, the new thinking, the new mindset that we need to have. And we describe those as cultural beliefs. And we actually give them our own names, right? So they speak really to the greater ambition that we're committing to, that we're going to, and they're all worded I, that I commit to do a particular thing. I will do. So basically, we agree as a team that we are going to live this new culture because we would like to achieve a particular set of results. And we hold each other accountable for it, because a key part of the new culture is feedback. We're providing direct feedback. We also provide recognition. We celebrate when people are living the culture, and we provide feedback to say you are, but there are some areas in which you can improve to be fully aligned with the culture. So I think that we're on our way. We have a team that I think is pretty engaged now in terms of one that is customer obsessed and focused on results. And we have, because they've been living that new culture in I think, meaningful ways, we have seen the accelerated business growth in the business, and we have seen improved customer service delivery. And we have actually won several awards, some local, some international awards, because people are living the culture. And one of the things that we're challenging everyone to do is to own the new culture. We have one cultural belief that says accountability starts with me. I own VM success. If it's to be, it's up to me. So it's not an easy thing to do, but if we are, inclusive and focused and keep pressing away at it and holding each other accountable, we'll see results, and we're already starting to see results.
Thank you for that answer, and we have one more question before we try to wrap up.
Right. Could you talk a bit about the relationship between empowerment and accountability, and especially as it relates to productivity?
Great.
I have observed that, especially at the lower levels of organizations, when you try to get a matter addressed, it's a big challenge, because people do not seem to feel empowered to act in a way that would actually lead to productivity. So one of the points that you made in your presentation had to do with how hardworking Jamaicans are.
Mm-hmm.
Very hardworking, but our productivity levels are low.
Right.
And there's a reason for that. Could you address that, please?
All right, so I think it's a brilliant question you have raised. Thank you for that question. You have raised the issue of empowerment, accountability, and productivity, right? And here's how I see it. If you really want to achieve a high level of productivity, First of all, we have to empower people. The empowerment looks like training, resources, the facility, tools that they need to do their job, appropriate supervision, good guidance, and sometimes the training is going to be on-the-job training, or sometimes it's specialized training. Whatever training would be appropriate for them to do the job at a really world-class level, at the highest level of productivity. People don't know unless you have told them. How are they going to? Everything that we know, someone told us. We found out somewhere, isn't it? Isn't that so? So why do we figure that you throw someone on a job and they just ought to know first day? Right? So I think we need to emphasize providing the appropriate tools, providing the appropriate training, the appropriate guidance. Also, feedback is important. Let them know when they're doing well so that they can continue to do more of that, and let them know when they're not doing as well as expected, so that they can, because very often, there is a perception of performance that is different from reality. And if you're not clear on your standards as a boss, then people will think that they're excelling when they aren't. So part of empowerment is sharing that type of information so that people can know whether they're meeting the desired standards or not. So that's what I call empowerment. Then accountability says that flows from that, because you really can't hold people accountable unless you have given them the tools and empower them. And if you haven't trained me to do the job and give me the manual that is required and so on, how can you hold me accountable? Right? But once you have empowered, then you need to hold accountable. And you need to then say, accountability is not a bad word, and it's a good thing to say that you have taken responsibility for this. We're depending on you. The team is depending on you to execute at this particular standard, and we will reward you when you have done well. We will recognize you when you have done well. And if you're not performing up to standard, then we have to work through a plan of how to address that gap and to get back on track. That's what accountability is, to say that, you are responsible for achieving some particular results. And then all of that then feeds into productivity, because the results that I spoke about really are the end product of that empowerment, the appropriate feedback and supervision, the accountability. If we all take ownership to say that we are responsible for scoring the runs, I love cricket, right? For scoring the runs that are expected of me by the team, then the team will typically win. It's when I go down there and start to swing my bat in a reckless way, then I go back to the pavilion before time and I haven't delivered the results, right? So I think one thing we need to do in Jamaica better is to start by educating our people, giving them the appropriate training, ensuring that they have the appropriate tools to do their jobs, ensuring that they understand and implementing appropriate systems of accountability and ownership, recognizing people, rewarding them appropriately, so that they feel that there's something worthwhile working for, right? And then sharing how the productivity is improving as we have gone along, because sometimes we don't share enough information with our people. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Campbell. And at this time, we want to express our own appreciation for your coming and sharing with us. And I'm going to ask Ms. Dawn Petgrave to come at this time for this presentation to you.
Sir Campbell, I took 6 pages of notes.
Sorry?
And
Sorry.
No. And I could go on. So thank you so much. So Mr. Courtney Campbell, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Victoria Mutual Group, in appreciation of presenting at the Jamaica THEOLOGICAL SEMINARY Leadership Conference under the theme, Effective Leadership for the 21st Century. Sir, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pitt.
And I think, okay.
That's all right there.
I think you would agree with me that today we were stimulated in our thinking, in our thoughts with regards to how we achieve transformational results through inclusion and visionary leadership. This really sets the tone for the rest of the activities, for the rest of the remaining sessions of our conference. This evening we will have Dr. Michael Friday sharing with us on partnership dynamics in transformational leadership. And tomorrow at noon, Dr. Barnett will be sharing on the dark side of leadership. And we have other topics to follow. People engagement in authentic leadership, a call to true leadership and the fundamentals of Christian leadership. And finally, leadership fostering barrier-free enthusiasm. I'd like to say to all of you who shared with us today, thank you for joining us. Please continue to be part of the sessions this evening through Thursday evening. And we thank you for making this possible and for allowing us to launch what I believe is going to be an annual event here at Jamaica Theological Seminary, and possibly leading into an academic program on organizational leadership. Thank you for coming today and for participating in this exercise.